You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.
And welcome to the Win-Win podcast. This is Ben Wolf, as always, your host. I'm pleased to welcome my guest today on the topic of negotiating for life, Chris Voss. Before we get into introducing him, I want to ask everybody to pause and stop for a second. As you know, the content here and the information we're sharing and that Chris and other guests have been sharing are extremely valuable for business owners, small and mid-sized businesses. The way to have the algorithms give that access and that knowledge to more people is when you like and subscribe this content, share this episode with other people you think would benefit from it and would learn something from it. I'd like you to please do that. And with that, I want to get into introducing our guest today. He is the CEO, founder, and instructor at the Black Swan Group. I'll share the website there. That's blackswanltd.com. He founded the Black Swan Network on the Fireside Chat program, which just really opens up the teachings of the Black Swan Network and Chris and Never Split the Difference to a lot more broader spectrum of people. So I ask you to check that out. We'll share the links in the description below. We'll hopefully even get a chance to talk about it a little bit. Chris spent 24 years at the FBI, where he was a lead international kidnapping negotiator. He wrote the New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Never Split the Difference, Negotiating as If Your Life Depended on It. Again, link in the description. And I'm thrilled to say, welcome, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on. Absolute pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Well, definitely my pleasure as well. And I guess I want to start off asking you the same thing I ask all of my guests, which is if you can give us a quick 2-minute background, sort of like where you came from that gets us to the point of talking about, or maybe your fascination, which I know you talk about in the book, how you got into it, but how you got into negotiation and such that we're talking about this today.
Yeah. All right. Small town, blue collar kid from Iowa, traditional Midwestern family. From the 1960s, you know, I'm a last century guy. Wanted to be in law enforcement. Went on as a police officer, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Very good police department. Still looking to learn and grow, and so the lure of international travel beckoned me to federal law enforcement. Joined the FBI, Pittsburgh, then New York City. Was a SWAT guy, FBI SWAT in Pittsburgh. Then in New York City, in the process of trying to go on for the hostage rescue team, which is the FBI's equivalent of the Navy SEALs, re-injured my knee, loved crisis response, tried to get into hostage negotiation, got rejected, asked what I needed to do to get in, did it, got in, loved it. You know, the thought of changing outcomes with just words, behavioral change, rapport, empathy, emotional intelligence, you know, all mystical, magical things, alchemy back then, which we have a much better handle on these days. Ended up becoming the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator. Spent the last 7 years of my FBI career kind of working kidnappings all over the globe. Got out, started teaching the ideas in business schools. Taught at Harvard Law School, taught at Georgetown's business school, USC's business school. My students killed it using hostage negotiation techniques in their everyday lives and their businesses. Wrote Never Split the Difference with my son and Brandon Voss and Tal Raz. You know, Brandon Voss, the uncredited co-author, Tal Raz, genius business book writer. Founded the Black Swan Group. Never Split the Difference, been the best-selling business negotiation book in the world since it came out back in 2016.
All right. Awesome. I appreciate it. And I guess what, you know, my world that I'm in is the small and mid-sized business world.
Yeah.
You know, we have a fractional COO firm, largest of that type.
Real entrepreneurs, right? I mean, small and mid-sized, these are entrepreneurs.
Yeah, there's not big corporate.
Yeah.
And you know, I think that when a lot of people in this world think of negotiation, they think of, oh, it's the big corporate or big boardroom or these big high stakes deals that don't come along very often.
Yeah.
And they don't realize how it's part of daily life, daily business,
right.
and even personal life.
Right.
So I guess what my first question is, if you could share a couple stories that just kind of illustrate times when negotiation skills philosophy comes into business life, like in a normal smaller mid-sized business?
Yeah, well, the most dangerous negotiation is one you don't know you're in. And then, so the Black Swan philosophy is collaboration. And as you said before, some of this nonsense, corporate negotiations are deceptive, table pounding. I got a friend of mine whose brother worked for Microsoft, and he said, as a CEO, or not a CEO, but an executive with, I think it was Microsoft, that his brother said, say whatever you got to say to get your way. And he told me candidly, it kind of ruined my brother. And we don't do that. We don't teach that. It's bad long term. Negotiation should be about great collaboration, long-term trusted relationships. Now, from everything to, do you want to collaborate on a project internally in the company? And anytime the words "I want" or "I need" or in your head are coming out your mouth, you're in a negotiation. It's not just about money. It's really about collaboration. What time do you want to get the meeting started? Who's going to show up on time? Whether or not you're going to implement the strategy that we're working on together. This is all collaboration, and it should be collaboration of trusted relationships. Like, we negotiate in my company with each other every day. Got about 22, 23 people. The number fluctuates based on turnover. Like, I get a text before I come on with you, and my assistant is asking me a question. Now I got to find out what's behind the question before for me to fully answer. And I go, well, I don't know. That's a great question. Let me think about it. Seems like you have a reason for asking. I'm in a negotiation for information right now with my assistant. Before I answer, I got to know the context, and I got to respond to her in a way that makes it easy for her to give me information so I can make a better decision. I could say, what makes you ask? Which is one way to pull that information from her, from anybody else. But seems like you have a reason for asking is easier on the brain to answer. It's less work. I'll get a more candid answer. So I'm negotiating constantly with everybody around me. Everybody.
Right. Yeah, I love that labeling example with right there. Labeling what it is, making a statement, an observation, and just creating the opening.
Yeah, well said. Creating an opening so somebody feels comfortable responding.
Right. What about, what's a time, and you talk about this in your book, but like what's an example of where people have used some of these skills, like in their personal life with their wife, friends, kids, husband?
Yeah, well, when my son was playing football, and it's one of the stories in the book, I needed behavior change. What was a behavior change? He was an offensive lineman and got moved to a middle linebacker. And an offensive lineman, I mean, these guys are like mountain goats, mountain rams. I mean, they hit everything they could see. They crash into it with their head. They feel bad if they miss anything. And a middle linebacker's got to only hit one person, guy with the ball. Middle linebacker's got to duck and dodge and get out of everybody's way. Now that rubs a offensive lineman against the grain. I think getting out of somebody's way is trying to hit him is unmanly. It's cowardly. And he's playing football, and he is not listening to me. He's not ducking blocks. He's not listening to his coach. He's soaking up half of the blockers, and somebody else is making a tackle. And we keep coaching him, and I'm thinking, like, well, what is going through this guy's mind? Because that's what empathy is about. What's going through the other side's mind? How do they see it? Not how they should see it. He should see it, that his job has changed and he needs to do it differently, but he's not seeing it that way. And I think, all right, so from his perspective, getting out of the way of somebody's trying to hit him is cowardly. It's unmanly. So I pull him off to the side one day and I say, you think that if you duck and get out of the way of somebody who's trying to hit you on a football field, that makes you less of a man, that it makes you cowardly? And he kind of looks down and he goes, that's right. Which are the magic words, not you're right. That's right. When something is revealed to you as truth, that's what you say. Or when you completely agree. And that's right, you're trying to get one or two things out of people to get them to change their mind. either they completely agree or you reveal the truth to them that was eating at him. And he said, that's right. He started ducking blocks the very next day.
What's wrong with "you're right"?
You're right is what everybody says to somebody else when you just want them to stop talking. Many marriages are surviving on a Band-Aid of "you're right." They're using it to duck arguments, and they use it over and over and over again, men and women, to get the other person to stop bothering them about something because they don't want to make them mad. And they don't want to hear it anymore. And they look at the other person and they say, you're right. And what amazes me is everybody does this to keep the peace and not comply. And nobody realizes when it's being done to them. It's hysterical.
When I know, let's say I'm the nagger, I noticed it's been done to me. I read your book or whatever it is. I listen to this podcast and somebody's going, you're right. I know you're right. And I realized, oh my gosh, we got caught in this trap. They're not here. They're not hearing me.
Yeah.
Like how do we break the pattern?
Yeah, it's a great question. And congratulations to you for waking up to it. I mean, a friend of mine, I live in Vegas, and this guy, a good guy named Tim Larkin, runs a shooting range and teaches self-defense. He wrote a book called, he's in a Black Belt Hall of Fame, He wrote a book called When Violence is the Answer. Like, when is the answer? It's the answer. It's a last resort. And of course, a guy like that's interested in verbal communication. And he comes up to me and he says, one day, he says, oh man, you save me so much money, because I'm in a meeting with my executives and one of them looks at me and says, Tim, you're right. And like you, he thinks, holy cow, I am off track. And instead of getting angry, he stops the meeting, he pulls everybody out separately, and he hears each person out. He takes it as a sign. The other person saying, like, look, you're just not listening to me and I can't take it anymore. So what's the first move? First move is probably a label, like the label that I used earlier. You get somebody saying you're right, the appropriate label would be, seems like there's something here I missed. Seems like I'm just not listening. Because the label is, verbal observation of a dynamic or an emotion. In a hostage negotiation, we call them emotion labels, just labeling emotions. In a Black Swan method, we've really learned it could also be labeling a dynamic, labeling a thought in the other person's head. It's not labeling the person. It's labeling the emotion or the dynamic. It's not really labeling the words. Because if they say you're right, an inappropriate label would, seems like you agree. Well, they don't. Dynamic is you're missing, you're not listening. So with practice, it seems very hard at first, but with practice, you can slap a label on almost anything. And as you said, it creates openings for people to talk to you.
The example you gave a second ago about, seems like I'm not listening. Yeah. I think that was what you said a second ago.
Yeah.
That's also an example, I think, of what you talk about. And I want to get into this also of the accusation audit, right? Because you're saying, just tell us here, what is an accusation audit? What does that mean?
All right. So the definition is you do an audit of the possible crazy, ridiculous accusations the other side could be making against you, at you, about you, not you towards them. It's the negativity that they may be harboring. And if it's hard for you to define, ask yourself, what do I want to deny? What would you say? I don't want you to think this. I don't want you to think that. I don't want you to think this. Now that gives you your list, because your gut instinct is picking up. If you're saying to yourself, look, I don't want you to think I'm being greedy. I don't want you to think I'm not listening. I don't want you to think I'm being disrespectful. Now, that's your list. Now, you don't say it that way. But a great way to get started is your gut's accurately picking up what the problems are. And it's the things that either negativity that either does exist or could exist, because it has a very inoculating effect. Now, this is backed up by neuroscience. In everybody's default mode of thinking, your survival mode is highly negative. That's how we wake up in the morning. That's why people do gratitude exercises, because you're trying to get out of the default negativity. You need a daily practice of some sort to go from survival mode to success mode. Success mode is highly positive. That's why it's successful. And that's why you need a daily practice, because it's mental hygiene, just like oral hygiene. So your accusations audit is, trigger off on, come up with a list of things that you either is or could be in their head. And there's usually a pretty standard list, actually, when you start getting used to it. They're worried about wasting their time. They're worried about you being greedy, you grabbing too much. It's a pretty predictable list.
Mm-hmm.
And then instead of denying it, you just throw it out there as a label. It probably seems like X, probably seems like I'm being disrespectful. Or it's going to sound like I'm disrespectful. What this does, instead of planting negatives, which everybody is afraid of, it diffuses or inoculates. Those are the only two things it does. It doesn't plant negatives. I know it works because there's been a number of brain science experiments that show that it works. People are harboring negativity in their brain. They're in an fMRI. The negativity is just called out, and the activity in the brain that's buzzing with the negativity goes down every time. Now, it goes down to different degrees, but it goes down every time by throwing a label on it from the other side's perspective. And you start out by throwing a label on it. And it's kind of that. It's a list of neutralizing negative emotion labels.
So to preempt that negativity that you predict is there or will be there, you put that label on it, neutralizes it. And you're right that, we think that.
You said what? You're right.
Oh, well, I mean it this time. That it feels like when I'm thinking about using that, it feels like, it does feel like, well, if I name something that they weren't thinking, and now they are going to think it. But you're saying that that's what we think. But that's not the reality.
As a guy named Anton runs an internet security company, small, medium-sized business, great guy, phenomenal company. And he's adopted this wholeheartedly. Now he's getting ready to talk to a client that he's got to sell a new server to. And he knows the client is going to feel like, he's gouging him, he's taking him for a ride, he's charging too much already, all the typical concerns of a small business person. And he was telling us he worked on the accusation audit for 2 nights in a row. He's willing to embrace, but it's scaring the hell out of him. And he's coming up with the list. I mean, he's coming up with a long list. And he said the first time through, it made him feel dirty. I mean, it it made him feel horrible. And he thought he was poisoning the atmosphere. So he finally worked his way through it and sold the guy 3 servers. And once he got to the other side, it's like any painful experience. When you really find out what's on the other side, then going through it is not painful. Going through it is delightful, because where you're going has changed dramatically. Emotional pain and physical pain kind of resonate in the same parts of your body. And the first time when it's painful, you don't know where it's going. You think it's only going to get worse. I remember the first time when I had knee surgery, I put ice on my knee. First time I ever put ice directly on my knee. And I remember the physical therapist put it on my knee, and it hurt and it hurt and it hurt. I'm an FBI agent. I'm about 2 seconds away from pulling a gun on this guy and saying, get that thing off my knee or I'll blow your brains out. Like, it was making me angry. And then probably about 6-7 minutes in, suddenly the pain went away, and I felt all this soothing. The inflammation's going out of my knee. The pain's going out. And I'm like, oh, this is where this is going. And the next time the guy puts ice on my knee, understand it's the exact same feeling. But instead of it being painful, I know where we're going. I'm delighted at the experience. So these emotional experiences and physical pain experiences are the same way. First time you do an accusations audit, you're going to feel horrible. And when you get to the other side and see where it's going, like Anton uses this stuff constantly now because he knows where it's going.
Right. So hard the first time. Honestly, that concept is sort of something that I'm naturally drawn to because I hate the tension of like unspoken things. And so for me, it's sort of like a release, the concept of stating out loud these things that are giving me anxiety that I think they think or that they might think. And so I don't know, it's just a somewhat different reaction to it, but I imagine everybody, once they get used to it, probably feels that way.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like when you start seeing how quickly it gets rid of the tension of the unspoken, and that's a great phrase. Because most people's experience is denying that tension, and it's like denying that there's an elephant in the room. And the person's reaction is to explode. And to understand the difference is the 2 millimeter shift is going from the denial to the observation. And if you haven't experienced it, you can't imagine that's going to make the difference. But the tension of the unspoken then interferes with all thinking.
Right.
Nobody can think because that tension is palatable and it gets in the way of collaboration.
Right. Right. You're operating from fear or insecurity. When people try to, they read your book, maybe they're attending the Fireside Chat Black Swan Network program, or they're learning from you in one way or another, trying to apply these teachings. I guess, what is like the biggest mistake that people make when they try to apply these things? What's the biggest mistake that people make?
Well, in the accusations audit, a lot of people sort of kind of pull their punches. Instead of saying, look, it probably seems like I'm the greediest person you ever met. They're going to want to say, it might seem like maybe I might be asking too much. Like the minute you start trying to pull your punches on the accusations audit, you might be uncomfortable with this, as opposed to you're going to hate this. And like with, the other book I got up on a screen, The Full Fee Agent, like residential real estate agents, they got to deliver bad news all the time. And, we'll teach them to say, look, this is going to break your heart. And they're like, I can't say that. I mean, it's one of my favorite phrases. Like, this is going to break your heart. Because then you're afraid of the impact. And when the other person like braces themselves and they go like, all right, what is it? And you tell them and they go like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And it's, it's understanding where you're taking people. I mean, we get kind of, it's sort of famous and legendary in the Black Swan method now, invented by my son, how to get a free hotel suite upgrade. And it's a 3-step process. And the first part, when you've got the hotel clerk's attention behind the desk, which is after you provided your ID and after they found your reservation, if you have one, because people can't multitask, and you don't try to get somebody's attention while they're busy on a computer. You're wasting your time. You might as well hit yourself in the head with a baseball bat. So after they found your reservation, and for me, I'll say, have you found my number? Have you got me? And I'll go, I'm getting ready to ruin your day. And they just go, oh. And then you proceed. And by the time you're done, they love you. And you can use it in all kinds. I use it for late checkouts. Like I'm in a hotel, I'm trying to get a late checkout. That's a commodity in a hotel. It's tough for them to give it to you. At 10 o'clock in the morning, front desk, worst time in the morning to call a hotel, because they're getting call after call after call, people demanding late checkouts. I call this young lady. I got need a late checkout. She's like, no, I can't do it. And I'm like, think to myself, do I really got to go down to the front desk and do this? Because I'm trying to do it from my room and I'm blown it on the call. So I go out of my room, I walk down, walk up to the same young lady that has told me on the phone she can't give me a late checkout. And when she looks at me, I go like, I'm getting ready to ruin your day. And she just goes, oh. Because, in a hotel, they've seen some crazy stuff. And she goes, what is it? I go, I need a late checkout. She goes, is that it? Okay. She gives it to me on the spot.
When it's not so much about like the severity of what you're about to say, but like I guess negative things that people think about you or might be thinking about you. Why, if I throw in things that they weren't thinking about me, what's the reason why that doesn't plant the seed? Like, why doesn't that, like, I understand, like, if I say something that really is happening and then that sort of diffuses it, but if it's something that they're not thinking, like, maybe they thought this one thing, but then you mentioned the second thing that they weren't thinking about you, why doesn't that plant a seed or somehow make it worse? Like, what?
Right.
How do you understand that?
Scientist question. And here's why that's a scientist question. Scientists don't want to admit anything exists until they can explain the mechanism. And what they do is they deny that it exists till they explain the mechanism, like the Stockholm syndrome. And if it's so prevalent that they have to admit it exists, but they can't explain the mechanism, they call it a syndrome. Stockholm syndrome was originally, what happens when people are faced with a similar threat and they should be enemies and they bond. Hostages in a bank in Stockholm, Sweden, refuse to testify against the hostage takers after the fact. And nobody could explain why. It made no sense. And it was so obvious. Psychologists said, well, it's a syndrome, which is an admission of a scientist that something works, but they can't explain why. So they call it a syndrome. It's why, very much like where the placebo effect. Scientists wrote off a lot of stuff, and now there's science that actually explains that the placebo effect actually works, and you can heal yourself through your brain and why it works. But they didn't want to admit that. So why does this not plant seeds? They haven't run the brain science experiments yet. I just know, our qualitative, unscientific research does it over and over and over. And so I know as a practitioner, like if we were to sit down and do a rigorous study, we could probably prove it scientifically. I got better things to do with my time. So, what do? I'm doing a Q&A a couple of years ago. Guy asked me a question that I cannot find a kernel of value. His question just tells me that I don't know what he was thinking about. He wasn't thinking about anything he had to do because his question was just dumb. And as a general rule, all the questions that get asked, they got something good in them. And I can say, well, all right, so I know the reason you're asking this, and I really admire your thinking behind this. And this poor guy, I couldn't find anything in that question to congratulate on his thinking. And my answer is going to be pretty much, dude, you weren't paying attention. Wake up. And I'm trying to think, I don't want to embarrass this guy. I embarrass him in front of the group. It's going to be horrible. So I go, this is going to sound harsh. Now I'm doing exactly what you asked me about, because I haven't sounded harsh. He's got no reason to think it. It's a highly productive environment. I'm looking to inoculate from a negative that has not existed yet. It's not there yet, but it's coming if I let it. The train is coming at me if I let it hit me. I go, this is going to sound harsh. And I answer his question kind of bluntly. And then so that I don't linger on how he reacts, I take the next question. And I'm in the middle of taking the next question, and a guy pops up and he goes, that wasn't harsh. It works.
Right. We don't know why.
Yeah, I don't know why, but here's what I'd suggest to everyone in your audience. Road test this stuff in small stakes negotiations with your significant others, with your colleagues, with your kids. And before you're getting ready to deliver bad news, which they have no idea is coming, say like, look, it's going to make me sound like a jerk. It's going to sound harsh. You're going to hate this. Whatever one of those works for you in the situation.
Right.
Wait no more than 3 seconds. No more. And then give them the answer. See how it lands.
Right. So for people that want to, that they want to apply this stuff, obviously people can read the book, Never Split the Difference. If people in real estate, they can read the Full Fee Agent that you came out with last year. And what you have this other program, the Black Swan Network with the Fireside Chat platform. Like, why'd you create that? Like, who is it for? What can people get out of it?
Yeah, originally it's founders are Mark Cuban and Fallon Fatimi. Fallon's a friend of mine. She's a brilliant girl. At one point in time, she was Google's youngest employee. And they envisioned it as an interactive podcast network. And what it's turned out to be is it's actually group coaching. And we charge a lot of money for group coaching. And you have to already have had a starting point. Like you probably, most of the people that are on have read Never Split the Difference. Most, not all, have taken the negotiation class I have on Masterclass. Masterclass is an absurd value. Like you pay nothing for it. $180, $190 for a year. And some people, I'll charge you for a coaching session. An individual coaching session is far, far, far more than that, let alone group coaching. So we started this Fireside thing as an interactive podcast, and it turns out what it really is group coaching. So after you've laid down a basis, it's a subscription model. Mm-hmm. And you want to go, because our in-person training is very expensive. I mean, a lot of money. So how do you bridge the gap? How do you make a big enough difference in your life that you can afford, because you can afford the book, you can afford Masterclass, but to make that jump to the in-person training? And Fireside has turned out to be the perfect thing. Like if your company paid for a month of training with my company, group coaching, once a week, an hour a week for your group of people, we're going to charge you over $25,000 for that, for a month's worth of group coaching. Mm-hmm. Fireside is $1,000 for the year, not for the month, for the whole year. Mm-hmm. And so you come on and we'll have a topic of the day, and which about a half an hour of instruction, about a half an hour Q&A. And you can ask about what we're talking about that day. And we don't talk about it in theoretical terms. We're very practical. Use this now. Do this now. Or stop doing this now. And you're going to be able to have an impact on your life immediately. And then if you got a question about that, then people get the opportunity to ask questions. The last session that I did probably about 2 weeks ago, this guy signs on. He's got a question about negotiating with his boss. And I'm like, look, dude, it's pitch black where you are. What are you, hiding in somebody's basement? Are you on a run from the police? You're trying to figure out how to get out of going to jail? And he goes, no, as a matter of fact, I'm on a mountaintop in Tibet. And I'm like, what? This app works? You got internet? And he's like, yeah. And, I got a negotiation coming up later today when the sun comes up with my boss, who is not an American, because I'm in Tibet, and I need some guidance. And I'm like, this is cool. This is a lot of fun.
Wow. The reach. The reach. That's amazing. So we'll share the link where people can learn more about the Fireside Chat, Black Swan Network, the group coaching, share the other links we talked about. Really appreciate, Chris, you making the time to do this, sharing this information, allowing me to, ask these questions. And I just appreciate you introducing this to the whole audience here.
Yeah, the pleasure is mine. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And everybody else, we'll see you on the other side. Thanks.
You're listening to Win-Win, an entrepreneurial community with your host, Ben Wolf.